How's everyone doing? This is Steve Weintraub with Collider, and I am here with the excellent Sir Kenneth Branagh. Good morning from LA.
Hi, good morning, Steve.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you very much. And I'm just making sure I lost your technique. You're back, brilliant. Yes, I'm very good, thank you.
Listen, I want to start by saying thank you so much for doing a live interview with us on Collider. Super, super thankful. Very, very happy.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
I have a million questions for you, so I want to jump right on in. You're part of the Collider Connected series, which is like an in-depth conversation about someone's career and not just about Artemis Fowl, which is the reason we're talking today. And I want to jump all the way backwards. Were you an uncredited extra on Chariots of Fire?
Excellent, top of the class for trivia knowledge there. It was 1980, can you believe? And I was at drama school. I was in the summer holidays. There was a notice on the door at RADA saying, if you want £10 per day plus lunch, then please show up to this movie. And I did, and I had 2 days and a great time.
I would imagine you were 1980. You were 20, I think, at that time.
Yeah, 19 that summer, actually, yeah.
So did you know at that moment that you were interested in film, or was that sort of being on that set, did that inspire you at all?
I knew that I loved film. I knew that I loved going to the cinema. Always had done, as I'd gone a lot with my parents and continued to go. I was amazed on that set at how vast it was. I was part of a sequence that had a lot of extras, and there were a lot of cameras and a lot of fancy people. I remember, and so, frankly, it seemed like a million miles away from what would be possible for me. I felt at that stage that I was incredibly lucky to know that I had discovered that I had some talent for and wanted to be an actor, and then managed to start training as an actor. For me, just to work, and maybe just to work as an actor in the theater, was the height of my ambition. Being involved in films was, even while I was on a set for a big one, seemed a million miles away.
So you mentioned the theater work. You obviously had tremendous success in the theater, and you eventually transitioned to making movies and doing television. Do you remember what it was or when it was that you said, I want to try my hand at doing movies or television, not just being on the stage?
Well, it wasn't necessarily something over which you had that kind of active control. I was very lucky. I'd been in a play, a production of Henry V, Shakespeare's Henry V with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And a few years later, when I was in some more theatre, a producer, himself a kind of maverick, was keen. I met him, Stephen Evans he was called, and he wanted to get into movies. And he said, if you've got anything, I haven't done anything in movies myself. Would you be interested in directing something? And I said, yes, Henry V. And he was crazy enough to believe it was possible. So I needed a similarly kind of crazed individual for what was, for me, a passion about that particular play, but it wasn't part of some grand plan that I thought was even possible. It was only really down to him and another producer, David Parfit, who made the rest of it happen, that allowed me to do that. And I didn't particularly understand or imagine that it would extend beyond one film. It was a miracle that that film got made, but it turned out that it was the start of something that had some longevity.
Do you remember the last time that you were really nervous on the stage or on a set?
I can tell you absolutely. The last time I was really nervous on a stage was in the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics, where, directed by Danny Boyle, I had to give 8 lines of Shakespeare in the very opening moment. And I was reminded as I was rehearsing it that only 1 billion people would be watching it live. And when I said to Danny, where is the teleprompter in case I go wrong? He said, oh, we can't have that. My cameras will see that. I don't want to have that on screen. We'll see it because they're all over the place. I said, then what will happen if I have a brain fudge? That's 1 billion people live, just checking that. He said, yes, it is. I said, what will happen? And then he was a pause. And then he gave a great piece of direction from the great Danny Boyle. He simply said, you'll be all right. And that was it. So, but to answer your question, was I nervous? Yes, I was nervous. So I'd never be that nervous again, I don't think.
That's a great story. And I can't imagine. So basically, if you walk out or if you do an award show now, it's like, this is whatever. It's like 20 million people. Who cares?
Yeah, 20 million, easy peasy. It's when you get the billion when you go, okay, this career over, and there were so many people to let down. I mean, it was and the Globe to let down, and because it was also the piece of the opening ceremony there was just one voice. It was Danny wanted one piece that was just the human voice before all the pyrotechnics of the whole thing went off. It was a total privilege to do, but it was a knee trembler.
When you you've done so many performances on stage. Obviously, not every single performance is maybe at the level you're hoping to hit. At least that's just from the outside. I'm sure there's a night or two you're like, wasn't perfect. Are you able to walk away from an off night, or does that simmer with you for a while until the next time you get on stage?
Both things can happen. If you're smart, you let it go. You let it go, and it's like with films, there's an idea which I think is accurate, that you don't finish films, you abandon them. You just have to resist the desire to overwork them. So it is with a performance. One of the glories of the theatre is that it's intransigence, it's transient quality rather. The chances to get it right in another way. So you have to let go. You have to let the bad wine out, as they say, and come back as fresh as you can. But occasionally you can't avoid the preoccupation, and sometimes you got to work on specific things. So it's a bit of a mixture.
You have obviously done tremendous work on the stage, with movies, with television. You're one of the few people that I'm aware of that can balance so many different endeavors through your career. How do you go about finding which area of your artistic expression you want to work on while, you know what I mean, by balancing those three different things?
Some kind of natural rhythm emerges. Sometimes the rhythm is simply imposed by, sometimes people want to employ you and sometimes they don't want to employ you. So you don't have to make the choice. But when you have some sort of agency, the cliches are all true. It's try and follow the good work. Try and listen to your instinct about what you think is good work. What does that mean? Well, stuff that you're engaged by and captivated by. And if you're a movie director, you'll need to be captivated and energized to do your best work for the best part of a year at least, possibly many more years than that, because that's how long it can take to get a project off the ground. If it's a character that you're playing on the stage, it might be for months and months and months. So you want something that is, replenishing, where the depth and the layers are really there. It's really try and listen to that voice inside that has you excited about the prospect of working on something, not just now in this minute, but tomorrow, next month, next year. That's what I look for.
You have done, I believe, 5 Shakespeare adaptations, with the last one being in 2006. Have you come close to doing another one?
I'm always close to doing another one. I sometimes I've spent a lot of time thinking about animated Shakespeare, but I always wait for the moment when the desire to do it becomes an absolute need and not just a want, not just a kind of a sort of desire, but an absolute persistent need, because that's how you're probably going to achieve it. And so animated Shakespeare, King Lear is a project that's been, circling me for quite some time. And so these things I know also benefit from sort of long-term marination. I try and do that and listen to the universe as to whether there's a moment to try and put your foot down on the accelerator if you're in a position to do anything about that. Yes, I've been close, but so far the time hasn't arrived for another one thus far.
I have to do a follow-up. I believe that we're in the middle of a renaissance in terms of animation. I'm constantly amazed with what's being put on the screen. Can you share what you've envisioned in what's percolating in terms of an animated Shakespeare?
Well, frankly, because I love the work so much, they dance around the plays. But an obvious one that actually came into my mind a lot when I was doing Artemis Fowl was A Midsummer Night's Dream, simply because the use of magic by Shakespeare in that play is such a fantastic invitation to the human imagination. And so the world of visual effects as we now know it can find a way to interpret a character like Puck saying, "I'll put a girdle round the earth in 40 minutes, in ways that could really give you such a cinematic thrill in all sorts of forms, animation, IMAX animation, who knows. So I continue to enjoy noodling and percolating.
My last question before I jump into Artemis Fowl. With the 5 Shakespeares you've done, if someone has never seen any of them, which is the one that you would like them to start with?
Oh gosh, I hate sort of prescribing things for people. I would say the best thing with Shakespeare, actually, is to make your own choice. You don't have to have seen any of them before. What appeals to you? I would say maybe in terms of the most audience friendly, I suppose, for an absolute first timer, I would say probably Much Ado About Nothing, simply because in that there is such sunshine in the play and in the characters. It has the usual darkness that Shakespeare employs, but it's a fantastically uplifting story with very familiar and universal themes to do with some of the extraordinary daftness that we are capable of when in the grip of something we call love.
Now, the reason I get to talk to you today is Artemis Fowl, which is going to be on Disney Plus this Friday. I'm very curious, what was it about the material that said, I have to make this?
Ireland, a young man's coming-of-age story, science meets magic, and a breathless adventure. I really felt that the pace of the story and the pace of the books was something that that in itself was an attraction to me. Most movies are too long, I think. I've made plenty of them that are too long. And so I wanted to make something that was just breathless, exhilarating, would be done in 90 minutes. Making great 90-minute movies is a lost art, and I wanted to get back to trying to do that.
Well, what's funny is I was going to get into editing actually a little bit later in this part for Artemis, but I'm going to jump in now. I would imagine you shoot a lot more. I would imagine your first cut was a lot longer than 90 minutes. So
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the editing process. How long was your first cut to get it down to that 90 minutes?
Well, it wasn't so much longer because it was something. It was over 2 hours. Yeah, maybe it was 2:10. But we really, one of the joys of a first assembly, if you like, is trying to really feel whether the movie is there. My experience is that the movie's always there from the word go, whether you like it or not, at whatever length it is. And so you're trying to find the way to, get that essential kind of quality. We shot it in a way that definitely was trying to find that velocity, that breathless velocity and exhilaration that we were after. So although the first cut or first assembly, as I might call it, was that kind of length, certainly it was 2 hours, there was no question that it was going to come down fairly swiftly and fairly easily, because in the DNA of the approach, camera movement was very swift. Scenes could be, modular and swift. We would always do, when we did acting scenes, we'd always end up doing one that was very swift, because sometimes after actors have played a scene for a while, they then can do it very quickly without rushing or feeling that it's hurried. And so we had all that kind of material in the bank to kind of shrink it down. Indiana Jones was what was in my mind. I always felt those movies, just whatever length the movies were, they felt like they just raced along. And it's how I remember movies on a Saturday morning when I was a kid going to see serials that inspired me. So it was that kind of rhythm as much as length.
Well, your lead is someone who's a child actor. So obviously you have less hours to work. How does that impact your production and trying to make your days when you have less time on set?
It's a really good question. You have to be super organized, You have to work out how to get the best out of the time that you have. So important for that was rehearsal ahead of time. That's rehearsal for all sorts of things, bearing in mind that our leading actors were 12 and 13 at the time. And so to some extent, you're asking to carry a movie. So there's a kind of larger educative process going on about acting and an approach to the job. So you try to get ahead of that and do some of that earlier on, so that when they did come on set for us, you say that limited time, they did the best possible work. These three of them were particularly focused, well-prepared, fun, good company as actors. And they had two exemplars in Judi Dench and Josh Gad, who could literally show them the working process, the hard work before the fun bit. And they got that. And we were pretty disciplinarian about this. We didn't want to waste their time either. It was important to us that they got their schoolwork done and that they enjoyed it. I didn't want this thing to be a pressure to them. It needed to still be fun, but nevertheless, there was a seriousness of approach underneath. That preparation, I think, was maybe the most important element of actually ending up using your time as wisely as you could on the set.
For the fans who are going to watch this film this weekend, the people that know the material, I always like asking about deleted scenes. What was the last thing you cut out of the film before picture locking, and why?
It was Artemis and Butler's journey to Vietnam to, as per the events of the first book, to meet a fairy who, by her very existence and with the property she had, a book, the Book of the People, would confirm that fairies existed. We couldn't, in the accelerated timeline that we had, feel that the story we were telling could allow the real-time kind of 4-day trip there and back to Vietnam that would keep this relentless thriller pace going. We did a great version of it. I think Hong Chow, a wonderful actress, came in and played the fairy. The boys were terrific in it, but it just felt like a sideways detour for a different kind of Artemis Fowl movie, which might have been fantastic, but it would have been significantly longer. And in terms of trying to meet Owen Colfer's original request and suggestion about what that first story was about, Die Hard with fairies, the pace that we were after precluded that. So it was the Hong Kong fairy sequence, the Vietnam Ho Chi Minh fairy sequence that went at the very last minute.
One of the things that I would imagine with Disney Plus, and I'm not sure if you guys have discussed it, is the ability to, and I don't think anyone's really done it yet, is doing a commentary or putting on the deleted scenes on the streaming format. Have you guys discussed that at all? Is it something you want to do?
Well, I must say I enjoy doing it because I feel for me, the educative process as a filmmaker is an ongoing one, so that when you look at the piece afterwards, and also when you try and sort of explain to people what you're up to, sometimes understanding that maybe you didn't make it as clear as you wanted to, or that something else has come into play, or that subsequently you've understood from people's reactions that what you thought was conveying one thing conveyed something else. All of that, I think, is really a part of a great big open conversation, which particularly in projects where you have a big fan base who are passionate about the material, I think it's sometimes interesting for them, and it's certainly interesting for me in the feedback side of that, to have that conversation go on. So I'd be very interested to do that if people were interested to hear it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you had any conversations about putting any of the deleted scenes on the streaming format, or any sort of extras, because it does seem like it's ripe for the ability for fans to see more, not just the movie.
It's a good question. We have more. We have those deleted scenes, and we have a lot of side material. And I think it's a good question. And I think we can jointly ask right now, live Disney Plus, to consider that very possibility, Steve. If it works, thank you. It's a good idea. And if it goes out there, I hope the fans like it.
You have done a few things for Disney. And I'm just curious, with the amount of money you've made for them, do you get a free Disneyland passport for life?
It's a tragedy. I've been very lucky in my life, but one of the few tragic facts of it is that is not the case. I do not. However, they've given me so much that I'm very, very happy to be in the queue along with everybody else.
I want to emphasize for people that are watching, again, Artemis Fowl. I have more questions, but it's on this Friday. I want to make sure people are actually tuning in for it. I want to jump in real quick on Murder on the Orient Express. One of the things that I don't think people realize is you shot on 65 millimeter cameras making that movie. And I've always wondered, did you have resistance from the studio or producers in terms of wanting to use those cameras, or was everyone saying, hey, let's do it?
We had great producer support, and we also used those same cameras, the cameras that Chris Nolan used on Tenet, we use for Death on the Nile, which was a film that we shot immediately after Tenet shot, and we were able to photograph our second Poirot film, which comes out in October, all things being equal, on October 9th on 65 mil. And no, we had great support. Disney, Fox both knew that many other people, but I certainly, for this kind of story, we're really passionate about trying to deliver that big screen immersive experience into the big travelogue dimension that is part of what Hercule Poirot takes viewers on, which is a trip to exotic locales and spectacular locations and sets these mysteries inside them. So it's really, there's an escape route for an imagination there that I think 65 mil just is dreamily set up to do. So I'm very lucky that they've allowed me to do it a couple of times.
I 100% agree. The photography from those lenses and those cameras, there's nothing like it. Have you guys? I'm definitely curious about the post-production process on the new one. Where are you at, if I can ask?
We've been in post-production since the new year. So before the lockdown happened, we'd got to a very strong and advanced state of the cut. The studio had seen it. We're very, very enthusiastic about it, I'm pleased to say. And so we've been editing remotely. My editor is in Ireland. My composer is in London. We're starting to reassemble as the lockdown restrictions ease a little bit. Obviously, we're socially distancing, but we're, as it were, getting back in the room together as we head down to the far end of post-production. So I was with Patrick Doyle, my longtime collaborator, friend, and composer, who is writing the music, and some splendid things were coming out yesterday on his Magic Machine. And Una, my editor, is here next week, and so we're getting close to the end game for it. But we've managed, through the miracles of the digital world, to do it remotely for a long time, a little more time consumingly, but very effectively.
I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers, and they all say they're able to do it, but it's just a lot more frustrating that you can't be in the same room.
We're definitely at that point where that factor is so necessary. Every time Una and I talk on whatever app we're talking on, as miraculous as those are, we keep saying, oh no, this is the moment where this issue, this last minute, is it that line, is it this line, is it that performance, is it this angle, is it that angle? These last 1-2% of finessing, the stuff that is the fairy dust on top of these things, is definitely the stuff you need to do in the room, person to person. The human factor in the finishing of a film is critical.
For fans of the series, do you know when they might start releasing any marketing, like a teaser trailer or a trailer?
I know that there is an excellent trailer that I have seen and I'm delighted with, and I believe this very week there is a discussion about when that comes out. I think the pandemic has affected everything. We're well ahead with those materials, and there are some exciting materials, I think. And I think it's just a question of trying to work out, what's the best way to get that to fans as the unfolding picture of the life of cinema across this summer and fall reveals itself.
You put together such a tremendous cast. I would imagine that it wasn't hard to get these people because of the previous film, your name, and the material. I'm just curious, what was it like when did everyone say yes, and what is that like?
A lot of people say yes straight away, and it's great. I think they have to know, and the key is, in the case of both these films, Michael Green's excellent screenplay. He gives wonderful chances to actors in roles that Agatha Christie, of course, primarily has created with great imagination. I think people like being in that ensemble. They know that they'll be in a number of scenes where it's all of them together. They have an unusual experience. You have a proper read-through. All of them were there for the read-through with the writer and the producers, and we all got onto a boat immediately afterwards. We go through a series of event and ritual. Their first day was on a motor launch. Their first scene together was all 12 of them on a motor launch on real water in the real sunshine, heading to the Karnak to get on it. And you're going to get your special moment, your special moments, but there's going to be a lot of it, which is the interplay between all of you. And I think they love being on a team that is a kind of a lot of talented people, and I really enjoy seeing the teamwork, and I enjoy the fun that it's had, because once the trust is won, people have a lot of laughs as well.
If you don't mind, I want to jump into a different film, which is Thor. You will not remember this, but I was actually on set 10 years ago when you were making it. And I remember standing next to Tom Hiddleston in costume, not knowing who he was, and seeing everything, and, Mjolnir, losing my mind as a Marvel fan. I'm just curious, back then, what a lot of people don't realize is that was when Marvel was still releasing movies with Paramount, that they had taken out this big loan, and if these movies were not successful, all the characters were going to revert to the bank. So I'm curious, what was it like making a movie like that, where literally the studio either exists because of this movie or it's dead? These movies have to work.
Well, what I have to take my hat off to Marvel for was that as a filmmaker, you were not made aware of that in a way that got stopped you being creative. But there was no question that tonally, Thor was critical after the massive success of the brilliant Iron Man from Mr. Favreau and Robert, and then the slightly less successful for them in their terms of that Hulk. Thor became critical to being the sort of tonal bridge, featuring literally a rainbow bridge as well, between, as it were, the earthbound and spacebound and fantasy-bound parts of the Marvel universe. So there was a kind of, connective matrix that Thor, Asgard, the Nine Realms, and everything that it involved could provide inside that large Marvel Cinematic Universe that was really enormously important, that couldn't be done by the brilliant, Captain America, because it wasn't the same material. This was the one that said, is there a fantastical future? So I knew about it, and I felt that it was as important as that, but also I knew that I could only do the best job that I could do. And I do think that Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, Victoria Alonso, they kept a steady hand. They played a great poker game, and God was in the details. It was very, very detailed. And then they trusted me, and they collaborated on the things that I could be useful with, and they were also critically aware that, and I'll never forget the moment that we cast those two boys. It was like a kind of meditation or a sort of incantation. It was Craig Kyle and Kevin Feige and me in a room at Marvel Studios, at Raleigh Studios down in Manhattan Beach, and Kevin Feige must have walked around this long oval table 100 times on that Saturday morning, as I kept sort of saying, I think we should call them. Are you sure? Yeah, I think we should call them. Well, who are you going to call first? I said, I think we've got to call Chris Hemsworth. But where is he? He's in Vancouver. He's doing Cabin in the Woods for Joss Whedon. Remember, Joss says he's terrific. I trust Joss. What about the other guy? Got to call him immediately. And then making those calls. And I knew how profoundly serious that decision was. Kevin said, we'll never make a more important decision in this company than what's happening in this room Saturday morning at 10:30. When you pick up the phone to Chris Hemsworth and then Tom Hiddleston, it's either going to work or it's not. Good luck.
First of all, that's an amazing story that I have not heard. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I've wondered this entire time, but one of the things I really wanted to bring up with you was casting Chris, because he and Tom, because these two men have become synonymous with the Marvel Universe. And do they still send you thank you cards? Because I think that's kind of important.
I tell you what, I sent a well done card to Chris the other week for Extraction, in which I thought he was excellent. It was brilliantly done, always around that. And of course, I keep up with Tom. I've worked with Tom in the theater, so I keep up with the pair of them. When Chris was here the last time he was filming, he was down at the house with the family. No, we keep up a lot, and they've become good friends. I think they see me as old crusty professor, kind of older advisor occasionally. They're both terrific guys. I'm so fond of them. I think they just did a wonderful job. And as you were standing next to them, I just didn't know how much it would change their lives, but it did, and I'm glad it did, and it changed mine too.
If you don't mind, one more
thing about that actually is that a critical individual in that process, unquestionably, is the head of casting at Disney and now Fox, Randy Hiller. Sarah Halley Finn, also a brilliant casting director, part of that process. But knowing that Chris, who'd come in at the beginning of the process and was not at his best, could and should come back, was Randy Hiller. So I think that both Tom and Chris owe Randy a few cards, and Sarah as well, over the years too.
Are you a bit surprised? You were at the beginning of this superhero mega event that has now taken over the planet. The superhero genre is the most popular genre on the planet nowadays. It's been just building and building. Are you a bit surprised that after 10 years, there's no sign of it slowing down?
Kevin was asked back then when I joined the Marvel universe. Kevin was being asked all the time, "Do you think people will soon get tired of superhero movies?" So that question was there back then, and the answer, I think, is no, not if they are good.
Sure. Did you ever think? Were you? I'm part of my last question on Thor. I have other things I wanted to ask you about, but did you ever contemplate doing another Marvel movie? Was it or doing another superhero movie, or did you sort of get your fix, if you will, with Thor? I've always wondered.
The way things worked, there was a version of events where if sort of sometimes with these stories, I like to plan them as trilogies, but it's much harder in this world for that to work out because the stakes are so high. You've got to really see how the first one does. When the first one was finished, essentially it had been 3 years of my life, 3 fantastic years of my life, but I needed to recharge on something else. I was too close to the glass on that one. So I would definitely never say never again, because as I say, it changed my life, it changed my career, and I'm profoundly grateful for it. I wasn't ready to go straight into another one, but I like the idea of, I'd love to be planning something that was a 3-parter, in movie terms. And that hasn't come along yet, but maybe it will.
Well, you're sort of doing that right now, just with a different character. I
guess so. I know the other thing, being Irish, of course, and making an Irish film, is that you take nothing for granted. You're innately superstitious. And so I've got to the point where, thank God, we get a chance to bring Artemis Fowl to the world, and now the world has to tell us whether they'd like more.
I think I've like 2-3 other questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
The first is, you got to be part of the Harry Potter universe, loved your role in it. Did it ever come up, or did you ever express interest in trying to helm one of those?
There was a conversation, for a while after that one about doing one, and it just it didn't work out. There were a lot of conversations, but in the end, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But there was a quite serious conversation, but it didn't happen.
Do you know which movie it was? Was it right after yours?
I guess it was. I guess it would have been Azkaban, but they in the end, I think they went with the director of Some Promise, called Alfonso Cuarón, who's turned out to be rather good, and so they definitely made the right decision there.
I was going to say there's a lot of people who feel that that's the best Harry Potter movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Of course, I have to bring up the fact that you recently collaborated again with Mr. Nolan. And I obviously don't want to ask you anything about your character because I don't want to have you talk about the story. I'm more fascinated by, or more interested in, the way Nolan directs, maybe in comparison to the way you direct. And if you could maybe sort of, are you very different in the way you guys work on set? Is it similar?
Well, I just wouldn't compare us. I can't think of myself really in the same breath, to be perfectly honest. I know that we both do the same job, but watching him is really a joy. He's an artist to his fingertips, and he's also an artisan. He values every part of the process. He has a great team. Emma Thomas is a great producer. No one should underestimate the phenomenal influence and contribution that she makes. His team of collaborators, his cinematographer, stunt director, their importance to him, continuity, a script supervisor, all these people have done, numerous films with him, and he trusts them, and he lets them do their job, and he values their job. So for me, it's I can't see myself, because I'm not outside myself to see myself enough doing it. But what I do know is that I feel that he's a consummate artist in what he does. And as I've said before, actually, he seems to be able to manipulate time. Not only does he obsess about doing it in the stories of his movies, in the making of them, he seems to stop time in order to address difficult things. I never felt, as I sometimes do in lesser hands, that you get rushed when big effects moments in movies overpower, and the crane and the action and the equipment and the vehicles are all happening, and suddenly the actors all get a bit panicked because you need to do it because it needs to happen now. Chris Nolan seems to be able to kind of stop that in a sort of matrix pause, come and direct you as if there wasn't a care in the world. You could take all day to rehearse the scene if you want, and then go back to unleashing the monster of chaos that will surround you and making the two things marry up. And it's a great thing to see. It's like seeing like sort of seeing a painter at work. It's fascinating to watch. I wouldn't put myself in that kind of category. But it's great to learn from.
I'm curious, how many takes does he like to do, and how many takes do you like to do?
In both cases, as many takes as it takes.
Got it. Another thing I've always been curious about, when you're on a movie like a Tenet, or a big secretive movie, if you will, is it sort of, do you end up signing a piece of paper that says you will not talk about anything, some NDA, or is it sort of like you just know, don't talk about certain specifics?
I feel with Christopher Nolan, in a very old-fashioned way, it's a handshake. I mean, in both cases, I tell you how I got the script. The door knocked, I opened the door, and standing at the door was an international film director called Chris Nolan, and he had an envelope under his arm, and he said, I've come to deliver the script to you. So it doesn't get more kind of personal than that, you know. And then how will we talk about this? 24 hours from now, sir, I will give you a telephone call and we'll discuss it. And it's as simple as that. And he says, it'd be nice if we maybe kept this to ourselves. He doesn't even say anything. I don't even says it like that, but nobody signs anything. It's a handshake and a sort of level of trust.
Do you feel a little nervous having that script in your possession due to the amount of people that want access to it or want to read it? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yes, no, it's scary. It's a loaded thing. So when there are new scripts, I run to Chris's associate producer Andy, who will take from me either my script or will replace the pages that are chased. But I don't ever want to have a script that isn't kind of locked in my bag. I mean, that is very, very nervous making. That's a script. Like on an airplane, if you're traveling to location and you're reading it. I mean, frankly, on a Nolan film, you think about that before your passport, because it'd be fine if they don't let me into Estonia. But if they do let me into Estonia and I don't have the script for Tenet, I'm done. It's over.
It's true, though. Are you amazed at the level of interest in this film, or is it have you noticed? Because everything you say, people sort of talk about.
The pandemic and our movement towards this latest development in it, which might include, God please, a lessening of things that might be helped, supported, symbolized by the return of large numbers of people to, albeit a distanced but still group communal experience of a piece of entertainment. That's a big deal in our world right now, isn't it? It's symbolically important. And if it would seem to go with what I can tell you it will, which is a movie that is worth the public's attention, then that could be a great thing. I know that all other movie companies are looking at it with real, interest, to say the very least, because it also uniquely combines with Chris's unusual brand, an auteur filmmaker who knows how to make a blockbuster. So if he's on form, then the movie business gets a lovely kick back into the direction of somewhere near normal.
2 last questions. Have you seen Tenet?
I have not seen Tenet. I've not seen Tenet, so I am dying to see it.
And my last question for you, as a fan of your work, stage, screen, movie theaters, television, what is coming up for you after you wrap post-production on the next film? Do you know what you're looking at in terms of the next year or two?
The post-production for Nile will take me through to the autumn, and then we'll release that. I've been writing a small personal film, which is what I shall do next.
Really?
Yeah.
You haven't written something in many, many years.
Well, the truth is, actually, Steve, I've written lots of things, but I haven't deemed them good enough. So I have a pretty packed bottom drawer, but I've practiced a lot, and so my latest practicing is producing something I'm beginning to think might be my next project, and that's been born out of this period of sort of enforced reflection. It's let me do some things that I haven't had time to do. So I'm looking forward to that, something on a smaller scale that's right out of my guts.
Can you share the title or no?
I can't right now.
I understand.
Yes, but when it's ready, I'm going to arrive at your front door. There'll be a copy of it under my arm, and I'll be dressed as Christopher Nolan.
That'd be amazing. Listen, I want to say for everyone watching, the reason I got to talk to you today, Artemis Fowl is on Disney Plus this Friday. I really hope everyone tunes in and watches it. And I really want to thank you so much for giving me a lot of time. And I wish you nothing but the best in all endeavors in the future.
Thanks, Steve, and to everybody watching, good health and safety to all of you, and enjoy Artemis Fowl. Thanks for being interested in the picture. We'll talk anon.
Thank you so much.
See ya. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.